Welcome to Loop the Loop English again, and welcome back to the deep dive. We are so thrilled you're here with us.
Absolutely. Great to be here.
You know, if you're like most people, you probably have a stated goal for your life, right? You want to be happy.
Fulfillment, growth, all those things.
All those big words. But the sources we've been working with today, wow, they point out this massive, often invisible wall that we build right in front of those desires.
It truly is a central conflict. I mean, it's one of the great puzzles of human behavior, isn't it? We're diving into material that really gets at that strange, frustrating gap between what we say we want
Yeah. Happiness, health, success.
and then what our actual observable behavior suggests we prioritize, which is, safety,
Inertia.
predictability. Exactly. And that's what this deep dive is all about. We're analyzing that core paradox. Our source material analysis called Why We're More Afraid of Failure Than Unhappiness. It just lays this puzzle out with such sharp clarity. It notes that most people say they want to be happy. But then here comes the punchline.
Right. They avoid the very things that could make them happier because they're afraid to fail.
And that avoidance mechanism, that fear, that's what we're here to dissect today.
Yeah.
Our mission is to go beyond just saying, oh, that's a conflict, and actually understand the root cause. Why does the fear of failure so consistently win out over this deep, fundamental human desire for growth?
It's this crucial subconscious trade-off we're making every single day between comfort and what could be real fulfillment.
Exactly.
This analysis, it gives us such a great framework for understanding the psychology of it all, and more specifically, its paralyzing effect.
Oh, it is paralyzing.
It's not just about losing money or time. It's
Right.
the image I got was like standing at the bottom of a mountain trail you desperately want to climb. But you stay there at the bottom because you're so worried you might trip on the first small stone that you absolutely guarantee you get zero view from the top.
You guarantee it. And the reason that fear has such a grip on us, according to this material, is that it's not just about practical things. It's rooted in something way, way deeper.
What's that?
Our personal identity. The risk isn't just that the task will fail. It's the fear that the self will fail.
Oh, wow. Okay, so that makes the stakes just astronomical.
Completely.
If a small risk to my career feels like an existential threat to who I am as a person, then of course I'm going to stay put. Of course I am.
It's the only rational choice at that point.
Okay, let's unpack this enormous identity-based fear. Because if we can understand why we avoid the risk, then we can start to see how that avoidance actually guarantees unhappiness. Let's start with the weight of personal failure, why safety wins.
This section gets right to the heart of it, the core psychological mechanism. Why does failure carry such an incredibly heavy emotional tax?
And the analysis gives us the answer right away, and it's so stark, it just says, failure feels personal.
That's it. So potent, so concise, and it explains so much. Failure isn't just an outcome. It's not a neutral data point you can just shrug off.
No, it's internalized, instantly. It becomes a reflection of who you are, not just what you did.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And that's the critical implication here. Failure isn't interpreted as, the market wasn't ready or the strategy was flawed.
Right, some external thing.
No, it's seen as evidence of a deep personal deficit, a flaw in your character or your ability that was just waiting to be exposed. The analysis really emphasizes this by stating that failure feels like proof that we're not good enough.
And you can almost hear that internal monologue, can't you? If I try to launch some passion project and it collapses, the healthy response is, okay, that was tough. What did I learn?
The curiosity mindset.
Yeah, but the identity threat response is, I knew it. I am fundamentally incapable of doing big things. This just proves I should stick to small, safe stuff.
And that leap right there, that jump from the project failed to I am a failure.
Yeah.
That's the psychological trap we have to dismantle.
We just completely conflate our performance with our worth.
We do. And once that connection is locked in, the whole game changes. Your primary goal is no longer to succeed. It's simply to survive, to protect yourself from ever feeling not good enough again.
And once you're operating from that place of self-protection, well, the consequence is just inevitable.
It leads directly to it.
Yeah, the analysis states it so clearly. People often choose safety over growth. This is where that paradox we talked about becomes visible in our daily lives.
Mm.
It's an active choice to just preserve the status quo, even if the status quo is, chronic low-level pain.
And we're so good at rationalizing it, too. We call it prudence or being responsible.
Right, I'm just being cautious.
Exactly. We confuse caution with fear, and we tell ourselves we're making the mature choice when really we're just choosing predictability over possibility.
This is where it gets so compelling because the analysis gives us these three perfect universal examples of where this choice for safety plays out, and they're so relatable. Let's tackle the first one. Staying in jobs they dislike.
Ah, yes. This is, statistically, probably the most common one.
I'd believe it.
The individual is in a role where they feel unfulfilled, maybe undervalued, maybe even actively miserable. They know it drains their energy. They know it makes them unhappy.
Every Sunday night, that feeling of dread.
Exactly, that chronic feeling. And yet they stay. Why? Because the known unhappiness, that familiar, predictable grind, is psychologically safer than the unknown risk of changing careers.
But wait, let's push on that a little. Isn't some of that caution justified? I mean, if someone has a mortgage, a family to support, isn't staying in a secure, if boring job just being responsible? Where does that fear of failure cross the line from smart prudence into, well, paralysis?
That is the essential question. And the line is crossed, I think, when the pursuit of an alternative is avoided, not because of the logistics, but because of the potential blow to your identity.
Okay, break that down.
Sure. Prudence says, okay, I'll save up 6 months' salary, I'll start networking, I'll upskill, and then I'll make a careful transition.
Right, a plan.
A plan. Fear says, I will stay here forever. Because if I quit and I try to launch my own business or move into a really competitive field and I fail spectacularly, that failure would prove I should have stayed. It would confirm my deepest suspicion that I'm not actually good enough to do the work I truly love.
Wow. So the current dissatisfaction becomes this bearable, predictable cage because it lets you keep the potential of a better career alive in your head without ever risking its demolition through actually trying.
Yes. The stable paycheck is a mask for the instability of the self-worth that would be put on the line in a job search.
The source material calls this trading acute risk for chronic misery. I love that phrasing.
It's perfect, isn't it? The acute risk is that high-impact, short-term pain of job hunting, interviews, rejection, a failed startup.
Yeah, that stings.
It really stings. But the chronic misery is that low-impact, long-duration feeling of dread every single Monday morning for the next 20 years. We choose the manageable dread because the acute failure feels too much like personal shame.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. Let's move to the second example, which is all about our interpersonal lives. Avoiding difficult conversations.
Oh, this one is so insidious. It's sneaky because we frame it as, being nice or keeping the peace.
I just don't like conflict.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But what are we actually preserving? The analysis suggests we're protecting a static relationship, even if it's flawed, rather than risking conflict for the sake of actual improvement.
I think we all recognize this one, whether it's asking your roommate to finally do the dishes, or addressing a boundary that a family member keeps crossing, or telling your partner about a deep need or resentment. That immediate impulse is just avoid, don't do it.
But why? Why does that specific conversation feel like a failure waiting to happen?
I guess the failure is the other person's reaction.
That's it. The difficult conversation carries the acute, immediate risk of rupture. The other person might get defensive, angry, or just dismiss you. And that could lead to a fight, or distance, or even the end of the relationship. We fear the relationship itself will fail if we poke the bear.
But the sources suggest that if you don't address the problem, you are literally guaranteeing that the minor chronic unhappiness just continues forever.
You are. You're choosing the certainty of a slightly flawed, uncomfortable, inauthentic relationship over the uncertainty of a potentially better one.
That's a huge trade-off.
It's massive. The person doing the avoiding thinks they're protecting the relationship, but really they're protecting themselves from the emotional weight of conflict, from the vulnerability of saying, I need this.
So all the things that make a relationship deep and resilient, navigating differences, building intimacy, you just can't get there if you're constantly avoiding.
You can't. You keep the relationship in a state of suspended animation. It never fails spectacularly, sure, but it never fully lives either.
What a cost. Trading real intimacy for superficial peace. And that brings us to the final and maybe the most poignant example of avoidance. Delaying dreams.
Ah, the classic. Procrastination as a preservation strategy. This is where the fear of personal failure is just so transparent.
How so?
Well, when you delay a big, important dream writing, that novel, starting that nonprofit, learning to paint, you get to keep the dream intact. It stays perfect in theory.
Right. It's pristine. It's untouched by the messy, harsh reality of actually doing it.
Exactly. If I keep my dream novel just in my head, it is a guaranteed masterpiece. The second I put the first word on the page.
It's flawed. It's hard. It's maybe terrible.
And you risk shattering the dream through execution.
And why is shattering the dream so terrifying?
Because that failure would seem to confirm that deep personal deficit, that you weren't skilled enough or talented enough or disciplined enough to make it real. If you just delay, you can always tell yourself, oh, I could have done it. I just didn't have the time or the money yet. The dream becomes a psychological life raft.
So the dreamer is trading the genuine fulfillment of a messy, attempted reality for the perpetual but totally empty potential of an idea.
And that mental safety net is everything. The moment you start, you trade the infinite potential of the idea for the finite, imperfect reality of the attempt.
And this all leads us back to the comfort zone, doesn't it? The source material mentions this concept. These three behaviors, the job, the conversation, the dream, are all perfect examples of choosing the comfort zone.
That's the perfect connection, because the comfort zone isn't necessarily comfortable.
No, not at all. It's just predictable.
It's predictable. It's the place where your current level of personal inadequacy is safely contained and, crucially, not tested. People are choosing the known discomfort, the chronic unhappiness, because the alternative involves the high emotional price of potential failure, that threat to their very identity.
The discomfort zone is the growth zone. The safety zone is the stagnation zone.
That's the paradox. You accept a low-grade anxiety about your job because escaping it requires entering a high-grade, acute fear, the fear of a failed career move. We are masters at trading short-term, acute pain for guaranteed, long-term, chronic misery. It's a terrible bargain, but it feels safer because the pain is manageable.
And this distinction, managing misery versus facing risk, it just defines so many choices we make. Okay, so now that we really understand this psychological trap, we need a major conceptual shift. We have to challenge the whole premise that failure is the enemy.
Yes.
And that brings us beautifully into section 2, redefining failure. Process, not opposite.
This is the pivotal moment of insight in the sources. I mean, society, our education systems, they've all conditioned us to see failure as the antithesis of success.
Yeah, they're like polar opposites, black and white.
Exactly. And if they're opposites, then logically, every step you take towards success must be a step away from failure. But the analysis just throws a wrench in that with this critical rebuttal. But failure is not the opposite of success.
Okay. That immediately challenges everything. If they aren't binary opposites, then how should we think about them? What is their relationship?
We tend to see them as two ends of a line, right? But the analysis implies they're inextricably linked, like different phases of the same action.
I like that. Not opposites, but phases. So where does the analysis put failure then?
It gives us the crucial reframing immediately. It's part of the process.
It's part of the process.
Failure isn't an endpoint, it's a data point. It's a moment in the journey that is necessary to refine your trajectory. If you see it as just informational feedback, the fear plummets because it no longer threatens your identity. It just sharpens your strategy.
That is the shift from a judgment mindset, you could call it.
Hmm.
I failed, therefore I am bad, to a curiosity mindset. It failed, why? What information is this giving me? And that curiosity is fundamentally non-personal.
And the analysis just drives this point home by looking at how universal mistakes are. They state unequivocally that every skill, every relationship, every career path, they all involve mistakes.
Which is so crucial because it takes the personal sting out of it and just universalizes the process. You're not a unique failure. You're just doing what everyone has to do to learn.
You're participating in the universal learning cycle.
Let's dig into those 3 areas the analysis mentions, starting with every skill. This seems obvious, but we forget it so fast when we start something new and feel completely inadequate.
Well, think about learning any new ability. Riding a bike is the classic example, right?
Falling over and scraping your knee.
You cannot learn to balance without falling. You just can't.
Yeah.
Falling is not the opposite of riding successfully. It's the curriculum for learning to ride. The body learns balance by correcting errors.
And that applies to complex intellectual skills too, like coding or learning a new language.
Oh, absolutely. When you start coding, the compiler just spits errors at you
Yeah.
constantly. And the judgment mindset, those errors are proof that you're too stupid to be a coder.
But in the curiosity mindset,
They're instructions. They're debugging tools telling you exactly where your syntax is wrong. If you avoided every single error, you would never write a single line of working code.
and with language learning, it's a social skill, so the stakes feel even higher.
For sure. To get fluent, you have to make thousands of mistakes, often in front of other people, mispronouncing things, getting the grammar wrong. If you're terrified of that acute embarrassment, you'll just stay silent. And you guarantee you never become fluent.
So the necessity of making mistakes to master something is it's non-negotiable.
It's the price entry.
The moment you accept the mistake is the curriculum, not evidence of your incompetence, that's the moment you actually start learning. Okay, so let's apply this to the second area, every relationship.
This is a big one. The analysis talks about the need for missteps, for boundary testing, for conflict resolution, to build any kind of depth or resilience.
We have this ideal of relationship success being like perpetual blissful harmony.
Right, but the reality is that perpetual harmony is usually a sign of avoidance. It's a sign you're back in section 1.
So a strong relationship isn't one without conflict. It's one that has successfully navigated conflict many times.
Exactly. It's like a ship that's been through a lot of storms. It's stronger for it. Conflict resolution is a skill, and like any skill, you get better by practicing, which means you have to mess it up first.
You have to accidentally cross a boundary or misread a signal or just say the wrong thing and then learn from the awkwardness or the argument that follows.
So the failure isn't the argument. The real failure is not learning how to recover and re-engage productively after the argument. Without those moments of friction and repair, which are painful, acute risks, the relationship just stays superficial.
It never builds that foundational resilience for the long term. You can't build real trust without testing the limits, and testing limits means you risk failure.
If you look at relationships that last, they are filled with course corrections, with apologies, with renegotiating boundaries, all of which are just responses to previous failures or missteps.
The relationship is robust because it's incorporated all the data from those mistakes. Okay, and finally, let's look at the third area, every career path. The inevitable setbacks, the pivots, the learning curves.
This is where we see failure in really concrete terms, right? Failed projects, budget shortfalls, strategies that just collapse.
Ideas that get rejected outright.
And any high-achieving person knows that rejection or a setback is not the opposite of career success. It's just one of the steps along the way.
The sources even point out that professional growth often comes precisely from the learning you get from the thing that didn't work.
For sure. An unsuccessful product launch gives you priceless market feedback. A failed pitch teaches you how to refine your presentation for the next one.
We hear that phrase, fail fast.
Yeah, and that advice isn't about being reckless. It's about being efficient in how you acquire information. If you're going to fail, do it quickly and cheaply, absorb the data, and build it into the next version. Slow failure, or even worse, avoided failure. That's the real enemy of progress.
So to synthesize all this, if mistakes are involved in every valuable path, skills, relationships, career, then the attempt itself is the successful action. The outcome is just data.
Yes. Failure, in this new view, is just information acquired during the process. It's not a destination. And it is certainly not an indicator of your personal identity.
That changes the emotional stakes completely.
Everything changes. You're no longer risking your self-worth. You're just conducting essential research. And that research, that information from failure, is the true engine of development. It's growth and improvement.
Trying, failing, analyzing, adjusting that loop is the definition of development. And that choice of safety we talked about, avoidance, it just arrests that mechanism entirely. You stop learning the moment you stop risking failure. You become stagnant because you refuse to pay the price of growth.
You have to see failure not as a penalty, but as part of the operational cost. It's a necessary expense for growth.
So if you spend time and effort and it fails, you haven't wasted your time. You've purchased vital information.
Priceless information for the next attempt.
Okay, so if we accept this reframing, that failure is just non-personal data, then what's the real danger? If failure is just a mechanism, what's the tragedy we should actually be trying to avoid?
And that question leads us perfectly into the final and I think most impactful part of the analysis in Section 3, analyzing the real cost, never trying.
This is where the focus shifts dramatically, away from the immediate, acute pain of failure and toward the chronic, long-term damage of doing nothing.
And the source material puts it in the sharpest terms possible. The real cost is not failing, it's never trying.
That is the statement that should just echo. Let's define that term the source uses, the real cost, the true price. And we need to talk about how this cost is often invisible, it's delayed, it's silent. So it's much harder to recognize than the immediate sting of failure.
Oh, much harder. The sting of failure is easy to quantify, right?
Oh.
A failed exam, $1,000 lost, an awkward 5-minute conversation. The pain is acute, it's present, it's undeniable.
It's a high visibility event, that's why we avoid it. Exactly. But the real cost of never trying, that accrues silently, like compound interest on a debt you forgot you had. It's the vast opportunity cost of all the happiness, fulfillment, and potential that never even got a chance to exist.
And this cost is so insidious because it doesn't show up as a loud crash. It's a quiet, gnawing feeling.
Regret.
Regret. And regret is a unique kind of pain because it's, by definition, unrecoverable. You can redo a failed project. You can't redo the last 20 years.
So let's explore that. Let's look at the long-term consequences of never trying, using our earlier examples. Let's start with the person who stayed in the disliked job for 20 years. They successfully avoided the acute failure of a career change. What was the real cost they paid?
Well, the cost wasn't just the failure of the attempt. It was the failure to live fully, to achieve their potential.
Yeah.
It's 2 decades of chronic, low-grade unhappiness, a perpetual state of what if.
They avoided that high-impact, short-duration risk of job hunting, but they guaranteed a low-impact, long-duration non-fulfillment. They traded the possibility of a better life for the safety of a familiar, unsatisfying one.
And that is the ultimate paradox of safety. The sources suggest people become strangely afraid to escape this unhappiness.
How so?
Because escaping requires confronting the very fear of failure they've been avoiding. The low-grade unhappiness becomes a weird, protective shield against the terror of a high-grade personal failure. At least in the bad job, you know your limits. Your safety is guaranteed.
It's a form of learned helplessness that they rebrand as prudence or maturity. They convince themselves, this is the best I can do, or this is the safest option, so they never have to try anything riskier.
They've basically signed up for a lifetime of regret to avoid a moment of shame.
That's powerful. Now, what about the person who consistently avoids the difficult conversation? They keep that superficial harmony for years. They successfully avoid the acute pain of a big argument. What's the real cost?
The real cost isn't the argument they dodged. It's the deep, authentic connection they never built. They traded the potential for genuine intimacy, which requires vulnerability and trust and conflict resolution, for the safety of polite distance.
So, over the years, that superficiality just creates a chasm between people. They might still be in the same room, but emotionally, the relationship is hollow. It's preserved in amber. It never grows.
Right. The failure to communicate is really a failure to trust the relationship's own resilience. By avoiding the acute risk of conflict, they guarantee the chronic, slow death of intimacy. They're left with a functional arrangement instead of a thriving partnership.
And finally, the person who delays their dream, the novel, the business, they successfully avoid the failure of execution. What's the long-term price for them?
The real cost is not the failed novel. It's that quiet, gnawing feeling of what if decades later. The failure of execution gets replaced by the failure of existence. The dream stays perfect in their mind, but the self is diminished by the knowledge of that unpursued potential. That potential just hangs over them, and eventually it turns into an accusation. You had the chance, and you were too afraid to take it.
That is just incredibly poignant. So this is the final paradox of safety. The initial choice to be safe, to avoid feeling like a failure, ironically guarantees the continuation of the very state you claim you want to escape: unhappiness.
Exactly. The avoidance mechanism, which is meant to protect your happiness, is actually the engine of its destruction. It creates a self-fulfilling prophecy of stagnation.
By protecting your identity from the shame of an acute failure, you prevent the very experiences you need for genuine happiness.
You're trading the pain of possibility for the certainty of regret. And the analysis is clear that long-term emotional toll of inaction is the highest price we can pay.
Let's ground this comparison one last time. Think about the difference between a high-impact, short-duration failure.
Like trying a business, it collapses in 6 months, you lose money, but you learned a ton.
Right. Versus a low-impact, long-duration non-fulfillment.
Staying miserable in a job for 20 years, slowly eroding your spirit.
This short-duration failure hurts more acutely. The shame is immediate and public.
But the long-duration non-fulfillment costs you your life's narrative, your spirit, your potential for joy. The sources stress that failure is recoverable. You lose the money, you adjust, you get back up.
But the years of avoidance.
Unrecoverable. You cannot get back the time you spent staying still because you were too afraid to move. That realization,
Yeah.
that is the true cost.
So we've covered the ground. We've talked about the fear of failure as this identity threat, the choice for safety, the idea that failure is part of the process, and this heavy, real cost of never trying. We need to pull this all together now and turn the analysis back to how you, our listener, can apply this.
Absolutely. We've explored this whole psychological landscape created by the fear of failure. It starts with internalizing an outcome as a personal deficit.
Which then drives us to prioritize stasis, even miserable stasis, over the dynamic, risky path of growth.
The core takeaway has to be that the mechanism for happiness is growth, and the mechanism for growth fundamentally requires risk.
And this is where we turn it directly to you. The source material provided a direct reflection question, and it's just a perfect summary of everything we've talked about. What would you try if you weren't afraid of failing?
That's a transformative question,
Hmm.
because it just strips away the psychological barrier we've spent this whole time dissecting. If the fear of being not good enough was just gone and failure was redefined as pure data collection, what would your immediate pure desire be?
And the answer to that question identifies exactly where your comfort zones are actively limiting your happiness right now.
It forces you to name the dream you've been keeping pristine and untouched, and it forces you to calculate the true cost of not starting.
And this whole framework leads right into some of the upcoming themes this analysis suggests for further deep dives.
You can see the logical progression, can't you? The sources mentioned they'll be discussing how comparison is the fastest way to lose confidence.
Which makes perfect sense. If failure feels personal, it's often because we're comparing our messy, flawed process to someone else's polished, finished highlight reel.
And that comparison just reinforces the idea that we are uniquely inadequate, which makes the risk of failure feel completely intolerable.
Then they plan to discuss the hidden reason motivation disappears.
And again, motivation vanishes when a task feels overwhelming or failure feels catastrophic. If you reframe failure as just data, the motivation to collect data stays high.
But if failure is proof of inadequacy, your motivation dies with the very first setback. It just becomes self-preservation.
Right. And then they hint at the practical solution, how small habits shape your future. This is the tangible mechanism for overcoming that fear.
Incremental growth. You don't have to jump straight into the huge, scary dream. You start with small habits where the stakes of failure are super low.
Exactly. This lets you build resilience and competence without immediately triggering that massive identity threat. You reduce the scope of the risk.
So instead of launch the novel, which is terrifying, you commit to write 500 words a day.
And if you fail to write 500 words one day, the cost is tiny, but the habit, the attempt is preserved. You can try again tomorrow.
It's the practical application of trading that huge, acute risk for manageable, tiny risks. And you need that kind of systemic approach because just knowing failure is part of the process isn't really enough.
Not at all. You need a strategy to integrate that knowledge into your behavior. Small habits let that process-oriented mindset take root. The faster you restart after a small mistake, the more you strengthen that growth mindset.
And the further you move away from that crippling paradox of choosing safety over happiness. So to synthesize this entire deep dive into one final thought for everyone listening, something that builds on the sources, we established the real cost is never trying, and that failure is just data. If we accept that, then maybe the true measure of success isn't how often you avoid mistakes, but rather how quickly you restart the process after a mistake happens. It's not about the depth of the fall, it's about the speed of the rebound. That's what defines your capacity for growth.
That rebound speed, that signals the death of the judgment mindset and the rise of the curiosity mindset. It's the moment you stop internalizing the setback and immediately pivot back to the task of learning.
A fantastic thought to end on. This has been an incredibly insightful deep dive into why we so often stand in our own way, prioritizing the fear of a momentary setback over the sustained long-term pursuit of fulfillment.
We really hope this analysis gives you a fresh, actionable perspective on those areas of your life where you might be choosing the comfort zone and maybe inspires you to embrace the friction that's required for true development.
Follow Loop the Loop English for more. Until then, keep listening and keep growing.
Loop the Loop English. Real English. Real thoughts. Real growth.